Thank you. Okay, let me begin by thanking Enzo and TherapyRoute for this opportunity to present some ideas to promote understanding of the processes that underpin well-being and emotional or behavioural disturbances that stem from developmental experiences. By applying this knowledge, we can better understand our clients' experiences and help them to put a handle on their concerns to reduce the sense of helplessness or confusion that some may have. When I gave a young client I was assessing in prison information about how his adaptations to childhood experiences had contributed to his current circumstances, he said, in gratitude, if you were a carpenter, you would make a perfect piece of furniture. I took that as a compliment. Another possibility, which I hope is not true, is that maybe he was suggesting I should change occupation. That was my joke for the day. Now, apart from assisting clients to obtain a perspective on their problem, therapists also have clues as to procedures we can apply to help clients overcome their difficulties. And equally important for those in the helping professions interested in prevention is to be able to share relevant knowledge in the community to create a healthier environment for children who hopefully will suffer less as adults in the future. This presentation will be in a 2-hour session, and it'll be broken up. I'm not quite sure when it'll be broken up for an interval for a break and a bit of relaxation for 10 minutes. Enzo will probably be able to guide me on that score. Anyway, that particular time when we have a break can be an opportunity for you to present other questions that I'll try to answer. In the first part, I'll introduce a way of understanding the origins and operations of core beliefs. I will share how I arrived at that perspective through my work as a psychotherapist with adults, which presented me with some unexpected observations that required an explanation. And in formulating an explanation in the 1980s, I developed a developmental model which explains the origins and the operation of core beliefs through the lifespan. In the second part of the presentation, I'll focus a bit more on the application of the model in understanding the presence and operation of unmet psychological needs in a variety of psychological disturbances, including anxiety, depression, and personality disorders. And I also hope to offer answers to all the questions that you may have. Okay, so now we go. Oh, mother, don't tell me. It's not. Oh, yeah, sorry. Sorry, this is the first slide. Now, I can read some of the information. Is this visible to the viewers there?
It is.
Is it? Okay, all right. So this is basically the aim. Sorry. You wouldn't believe it, but my computer's playing up. Okay. Some terminology to introduce. I talk a lot about affect or feelings. I also talk about hedonic processes, which has got to do with the pleasure principle, the avoidance of pain and pursuit of pleasure, a fundamental survival mechanism. And this principle explains much psychopathology in my experience. Now, another important concept is that of a psychological need, and I define it as an essential requirement to promote growth and well-being in babies, children and adolescents, and also the well-being of adults. And I'll be referring to 16 psychological needs, primarily drawn from the work of Henry Murray. The book is Explorations in Personality, and I'll have a photo of it in a minute. Attachment needs, we know, most people know about it. Dependency needs. Now, I'm going to break up dependency needs into two lots. One is care needs having to do with acceptance, approval, attention, admiration, recognition, affection, and physical touch, which is primarily provided by carers, but also others at different stages of development. And also there are agency needs, such as for autonomy, competence, and power and control. So they're basically dependency needs can come in two kind of categories. I guess everybody knows about trauma, which are extreme stressful events that are experienced as life-threatening or harmful, which are caused by misadventure, abuse, or victimisation. And we know about abuse being physical, emotional, sexual, which imparts physical or emotional harm on those that are affected, which ultimately causes suffering and associated psychological damage. And in developmental psychology, we know that neglect and deprivation, which is a failure to provide the social environment for fulfilling essential emotional and physical needs that are required to promote growth, security, and well-being. So these are basic concepts that are relevant. But another concept is that of schemas. And a schema has been defined as schemas are generic knowledge structures that guide the comprehender's interpretations, inferences, expectations, and attentions. And of particular relevance to well-being and psychopathology are affective cognitive schemas. Now, schemas influence how information is processed. They guide the habitual ways in which you see things. Here's an extract from Lay in 2003. Schemas guide the habitual ways in which you see things. People differ in what gets them depressed, anxious, or angry. We refer to these different issues as schemas. Depression is characterised by schemas related to loss, deprivation, and failure. Anxiety is characterised by schemas related to threat or fear of failure. And anger is characterised by schemas related to insult, humiliation, or violation of rules. Now, core beliefs are very, very relevant in the development of schemas. They are part of schema, but I actually believe they are responsible for the acquisition of other aspects of the schema. Now, the operation of schemas has been recognised in psychology under a variety of terms: apperceptive schemas and fictions, personal constructs, scripts, schemes, daydreams, mental representations, internal working models, and so on and so on. Now, schemas can represent or serve many knowledge domains. So many types of schemas with different content and functions exist in memory. Marcus proposed that one type is self-schemata, and these are cognitive generalizations about the self derived from past experience that organise and guide the processing of self-related information contained in individuals' social experiences. Once established, these schemata function as selective mechanisms which determine whether information is attended to, how it is structured, how much importance is attached to it, and what happens to it subsequently. Therefore, self-schemata can be viewed as implicit theories used by individuals to make sense of their own past behaviour and to direct the course of future behaviour. Now, Tower and Singer say, if indeed we organise our internal and external experiences according to generalised expectations based on cognitive and affective responses to earlier situations and our reconstructions of them in memory, then clinical work can be conceived of as an attempt to help a person identify or modify his or her implicit organisational rules. Okay. Now, in cognitive behaviour therapy, schemas contain thought contents such as core beliefs and conditional beliefs, as well as attitudes, perceptual biases, and feelings. Now, the relationship between schemas and other cognitive concepts is described by Beck and colleagues in a book on personality disorders published in 1990. Schemas are the cognitive structures that organise experience and behaviour. Beliefs and rules represent the content of the schemas and consequently determine the content of the thinking, affect, and behaviour. And phenomena such as automatic thoughts are regarded as the products of the schema. That's the book. It's an excellent book. It actually describes the development of schemas based on childhood experiences, but it doesn't refer to psychological needs, which I think is a bit unfortunate. Now, what are the origins of core beliefs? In cognitive behaviour therapy and many other systems, it is generally considered that environmental events during development shape the development of beliefs about oneself and the world. Judith Beck says, beginning in childhood, people develop certain beliefs about themselves, other people, and their world. The most central or core beliefs are understandings that are so fundamental and deep that they often do not articulate them even to themselves. These ideas are regarded by the person as absolute truths, just the way things are. For example, reader E, who thought he was too dumb to master this text, might have the core belief, I'm incompetent. That's an example of a core belief. Okay, now, in Jung's schemas therapy, the authors go further by suggesting that several kinds of events that impact on core emotional needs, what are traditionally called psychological needs, during development are crucial factors. In schema therapy, these contributing events include, quote, the toxic frustration of needs, traumatization or victimization, parental overindulgence, and selective internalization or identification with significant others. However, precise causal processes are not explicated in depth either in schema therapy, traditional cognitive behavior theory, or Beck's updated generic cognitive model published in 2014. However, Jung et al. Do point to repositories in memory systems in both the amygdala, related to fear processing, and the hippocampus and related cortical areas involving cognitive process as shaping subsequent reactions. I will describe a model that explains how adverse childhood events that impact on psychological needs become structuralized or recorded in memory. Okay, that's my offering for you today. Okay, children's vulnerability. The focus of attention on events in early childhood is generally attributed to Freud, who himself said, what poets and students of human nature had always asserted turned out to be true. The impressions of that remote period of life, though they were for the most part buried in amnesia, left inexorable traces upon the individual's growth, and in particular laid the foundations of any nervous disorder that was to follow. Okay. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about children's vulnerability. The young in the human species, children, have the longest period of dependence upon adult care as a proportion of lifespan of any other animal. What happens during that period has important repercussions for the development of that individual, their well-being and potential, and how they interact and function with the rest of the community in later life. What is crucial during childhood to promote well-being and prevent the development of psychopathology is the respect and fulfilment of a number of basic psychological needs, which I will list. Those needs were originally identified by Henry Murray in a book published in 1938. I will also describe my hedonic model of how the gratification and frustration of psychological needs during development come to have enduring influences. Now, I want to highlight that a lot of information exists about the mental content associated with different forms of psychopathology, and I give credit for a lot of that to Aaron Beck, who started the cognitive revolution, pointing to the fact that thoughts and concerns of clients suffering from anxiety and depression and other issues, that there exists a concern, for example, that in depression there exists a concern with loss and a negative view of the past, the present and the future. In anxiety, there are concerns associated with anticipating future threats and so on. Subsequently, Beck and colleagues and various other writers proposed that in the personality disorders, each type had a different type of cognitive content, such as beliefs and expectations, as well as behaviours associated with those beliefs. And I'll point out to a couple of those findings.
Mercurio,
yeah.
Could you slow down just a tiny bit?
I'm sorry. Yes, I could. Of course I can.
Thank you.
Now, Beck's cognitive behaviour therapy approach has teased out the components in the adaptations associated with various clinical conditions by reference to core beliefs, schemas, and conditional beliefs. Furthermore, the cognitions in various psychological conditions suffer from certain distortions or inaccuracies, which Albert Ellis, another pioneer in the cognitive cognitive approach to therapy, explored via a didactic approach by teaching clients about the nature of their irrational or unrealistic thoughts. For example, that the belief that they should be loved and approved by everyone, and therefore setting themselves up for disappointments. The cognitive approach has a lot of merit for understanding and treating psychological disturbances, but my experiences in conducting therapy led to new insights about the origins and operation of core beliefs. And I'm going to talk about some events I encountered during therapy with adults which reveal the existence in memory of records of childhood need, psychological need frustration. And the first one is what I call case A. Now, I first recognised the operation of unmet psychological needs when conducting therapy in prison with a young man who was a repeat break, enter and steal offender. During a therapy session, I asked him to do an association exercise. I asked him to write down on a pad a phrase that he'd just uttered in the session and to keep writing that phrase on successive lines and to focus and write down any new thoughts or feelings that arose. Now, he diligently wrote the same words all the way to the bottom of the page with nothing fresh or different emerging, at which point I said, that didn't get us very far. Upon hearing my comment, a smile flashed across his face. I asked him what he was feeling and he said he felt smart, that is, clever. Upon exploration, he reported having similar feelings when he got the better of others or teased his children. On other occasions, when I asked him questions that he did not know the answer to, his face would flush and the reported emotion was that he felt stupid. Now, a psychologist who had counselled him previously had noted that in his childhood, his father would criticise him for being stupid, clumsy and inept. And why wasn't he like his younger brother? Now, using the concept of psychological needs as I understood it by Abraham Maslow, I understood his early experiences of criticism and disapproval as thwarting his needs for esteem and competence and shaping his self-concept of himself as stupid and inferior. Maslow had pointed out that the neuroses were essentially a deficiency disease, the result of unmet psychological needs. Now, I described this case and several others in two related articles that I finished in 1986 and subsequently published on my website, which unfortunately I lost last year when there was a problem when I was required to switch internet providers, and I haven't re-established it. But anyway, so my original theory was in 1986, and I talked about the development of what I called affective suppositions then, and now I call them affective attributions, which are the same as core beliefs. Anyway, to get back to this client, this young prisoner had developed a coping style of avoiding feeling stupid and inferior in childhood and adolescence by engaging in minor delinquency, such as stealing fruit from orchards, going to play on the school trampoline after hours by scaling a fence, or breaking into a neighbour's cellar with an accomplice and drinking wine without getting caught. He reported feeling really clever and superior when the neighbour would complain to his father in his presence about not knowing how anybody had gotten into his wine cellar. The method used was that the boys cut a bar in the cellar window to gain entry and then stuck it back in place upon leaving. Anyway, by the time I saw this young man in prison, he had developed a recurring history of breaking into places and stealing items which were later mostly found by police dumped in the bush. So his offending was motivated more by emotional than material gain, and more specifically by his feeling clever in doing such things. Significantly, it was discerned that in recent years he would offend after some arguments with his wife, whom he considered to be verbally superior to himself. Such events resulted in his feeling stupid, and he would cope by getting drunk and then engage in a break, enter and steal offence that served to restore his well-being and esteem. At least it did that temporarily. Now, this first case opened my awareness of the relationship between negative childhood events that impact on important psychological needs and a person's recurring feelings, their self-concepts and subsequent habits and personality dispositions. So, to summarise, in this case, I began to see certain links, as in this slide, that certain negative life events, which Murray called press, which in his case involved paternal criticism impinging on needs during development. When I wrote that first article, two articles, I didn't know about Murray's theory, but certainly it fits in with the concept of press, which are adverse developmental events. Anyway, so the first observation that he experienced negative life events that impinged on his needs for competence and esteem. And there was also negative affect generated by those experiences. And he also manifested low self-esteem and a negative self-concept as an adult, which endured over time, and it could be re-aroused and manifest as feeling stupid or its opposite, feeling smart, by life stresses or other events respectively, that his offending behaviour improved or transformed the negative feeling state by making him feel clever and superior to others, which then became a habit. So this was actually where everything fell into place for me, because I then started looking at other clients' experiences. So now, after this eye-opener, and particularly by using a particular exercise that I learned from a clinical psychologist with whom I had therapy while training for my master's degree, I learned that extremely intense emotions created in childhood and apparently stored in memory and denoting unmet psychological needs could be triggered. And mostly, these affective reactions were rather intense and shocked both myself and the clients when they emerged. Significantly, I discovered that these normally unconscious feelings produced by childhood need frustration were often the motivators of particular offences after they had been triggered by current stresses. Some of the cases involving that particular exercise are in the documents online on TherapyRoute, but I'll repeat them here in case any people haven't read it, or well, I want to repeat them anyway. The first case is case B, and case B, he had thwarted autonomy needs, or that's my conclusion anyway. But here is what happened during therapy. This case shows the activation of an augmented negative feeling state, which I hypothesise as arising from the thwarting of autonomy needs. And I've called this fellow Ron, not his real name, but Ron was a young man in his 20s. He consulted me in prison. He manifested rebelliousness towards authority in his offending history. In a therapy session, he stated, "I won't listen to anybody. I have a tendency to forget things very quickly. I don't want people to tell me what to do." I asked him to close his eyes and repeat the phrase, "Don't tell me what to do," out loud, and to attend to his internal processes, his thoughts and feelings. After a couple of repetitions, the client changed the phrase to, "Don't tell me why." On repetition of this phrase, he appeared distressed. He reported feelings of getting wild, getting hot in the head. He also reported butterflies in the stomach and going dizzy. Now, he seemed shocked by the intensity of these reactions, and I have to confess so was I, because I had not expected that sort of emotion to come out. Anyway, I consider those intense feeling reactions as being an augmented negative feeling state arising from psychological need, frustration, or trauma, and wrote about it in my 1986 articles. Now, this fellow, whom I'll call Ron, had 8 convictions for drunk driving, 23 convictions for driving under suspension, and 3 life suspensions of his driver's licence. His last conviction came about after drinking in a hotel for some time. The pub owner said to him, look, leave your car in the car park because you've had a bit too much to drink. The pub owner's advice made him wild, in his words, activated the negative feeling state. He began to ram the hotel fence with his car repeatedly until he knocked it down. Then he drove off and around the streets until apprehended by police. To account for these kinds of observations, I developed this psychological needs model of psychopathology, which emphasises the production of intense negative feelings from the thwarting of psychological needs during development that stimulate the formation of primitive attributions or explanations to account for those events and are aids for control motivation by attempting to prevent a recurrence of emotional distress. Now, these dual component schemas, which is a negative feeling and a subjective attribution about its perceived cause, are referred to as negative affective attributions, with the cognitive part corresponding to the core beliefs described by Judith Beck in the book Cognitive Therapy, Basics and Beyond. So what I'm saying is that my formulation is that unmet psychological needs create intense affect, which is recorded in memory, and that stimulates the formation of an attribution or explanation of its cause. And that becomes the core belief. Anyway, my understanding builds on and expands Henry Murray's theory of psychological needs, which he published in 1938, and fortunately it was republished in 2008. The book is called Explorations in Personality. Now, I'll show you the title of the book in a minute. Now, there is, here it is here. This is the book, the new version of the book, not the republished version of the book with an introduction by Dan McAdams. It's a goldmine. It's extremely hard to understand, and I've modernised it a little bit, hopefully, for you tonight, the bits that I've extracted from it anyway. Now, the third case is an unmet need for attention. Sorry, I'm hearing a bit of a noise there. Now, Jim, not his real name, was a 17-year-old youth referred for treatment in the community for indecently exposing himself to females. This case illustrates the reactivation in therapy of an augmented negative feeling state arising from a frustrated need for attention. I asked Jim about the antecedents to his offending. He said that before exposing, something sort of clicks. I feel sort of frustrated inside, not sexy. I feel like I want to have sex, but I'm not randy. I want to masturbate. I want people to see me and I don't. Jim said that he fantasised being seen by females. I gave him an exercise, which was to repeat the phrase, I want to be noticed, with his eyes closed and to attend to his feelings. As he repeated the phrase, his voice became angry and terse. I asked him what he was feeling. He replied, I feel hot, nervous, tensed up, tension's building up, going all tight. This is regarded as an augmented negative feeling state stemming from a frustrated need for attention. I asked him, who do you want to notice you? To which he replied, anybody. I asked, who doesn't notice you? He replied, my family, my father and my sister. This led to a report of resentment that his father did not pay him much attention. Repeating the phrase, you're not paying me much attention, also activated an augmented negative feeling state. And in the course of family therapy session, the mother wasn't present, however, due to a family breakup, his father admitted that he had switched off from his son and couldn't be bothered with him. Now, the earliest events in childhood that produced the need frustration were not established in this case, and nor did I sort of connect it up with adolescent sort of sexuality. In other words, the sexual focus of his unmet need, if you like, would have occurred in adolescence, but I didn't explore it at that time with him. Anyway, so all of these were a novelty to me. Sorry, has anybody got any questions on that score?
If you do, raise your hand. Digitally.
Sorry?
Linda has a question.
Hi there. Thanks so much for the information. It's already really valuable. I think what would be really good would be if you could just sort of summarize the process, if you like, so that you've just been talking about. So as far as, if I could just explain maybe what I've understood and you could fill in the gaps, that would be really helpful. Would that be okay?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, great. So I think from what you've said, experiences start in childhood. They can be a number of things: attachment, various different needs that aren't met, that are psychological, and that leaves an imprint in the memory, which Murray speaks about press, which is these are the are they the negative life events then? Is that the experience of psychological needs that aren't being met? Is that right?
Yes, yes. And in fact, I've got a table of his presses, if you like. And I've also got a summary of all the steps put together in a short sequence.
Fantastic.
Way of slides without me talking. So
yeah.
I'm happy to go on to that. Anyway, okay. But really, I want to focus a little bit on Murray's contribution. Now, the book involved a theoretical synthesis of numerous studies done by a team of researchers at the Harvard Clinic on 51 adults, 51 men actually. And Murray identified 20 psychological or psychogenic needs which were presumed to interact with childhood factors, which he termed press. And they have a positive or negative effect on personality. Like, the research started with adults, and then Murray went backwards to understand the presses that had brought about their personality and dispositions, if you like. Anyway, for Murray, psychogenic or psychological needs are motivators that have to do with mental or emotional satisfactions. They were described by Murray as being a hypothetical force or drive or propensity within the organism which, if uninhibited, promotes activity, which, if competent, brings out a situation that is opposite as regards its relevant properties to the one that aroused it. So he's talking about something that changes something into a more desirable activity, or something that promotes a more desirable outcome. Anyway, more specifically, he said the concept of need stands for a force, the physico-chemical nature of which is unknown in the brain region, a force which organises perception, apperception, intellection, tonation and action in such a way as to transform in a certain direction an existing unsatisfying situation. So he's talking about a transformation of something from negative to something better. And now, when Murray described, he also described it as an electrochemical process of some sort, which is inwardly felt as the force of desire. But unfortunately, when Murray was writing, he described needs as the observations in adults of unmet needs. And unfortunately, even some eminent psychologists of his time thought that he didn't know what he was talking about because, for example, the need for esteem, he called it need abasement. And people said, well, nobody's got a need for abasement. But in actual fact, if somebody's got low self-esteem in adulthood, from childhood experience in adulthood, they berate themselves, that they don't think highly of themselves. So in other words, what Murray captured were the consequences of unmet needs, not what children need. He didn't describe them as things children need in order to flourish and develop. He described the outcome of unmet needs, whereas I'm describing the inputs that are required to prevent those outcomes. So I've actually adopted his needs but changed the names of them a little bit. So let me just see. Put simply, from Murray's perspective, needs are internal energizers or motivators that organise and shape adaptive behaviours in accordance with the hedonic or pleasure principle of transforming negative feelings into more positive ones. And psychological needs are believed to operate via neurophysiological processes in a comparable way to the biological needs for food and water, but relate more to social and emotional factors. Now, subsequently, Abraham Maslow and more recently self-determination theory define psychological needs less as drivers and more as essential ingredients or nutrients required by humans to promote growth and well-being in the young, and where deficits produce psychopathology such as the neuroses. My conceptualisation of psychological needs includes both aspects. Needs are important ingredients for growth and well-being, which are experienced as negative feeling states that energise responses that attempt to bring about a more positive feeling state. As self-determination theory states, the fulfilment of psychological needs is conducive to promoting well-being through the lifespan. They don't simply exist only in childhood, but the fulfilment or frustration during childhood development during child development have great influences on the individual's growth and future well-being, or its opposite, being the presence of psychopathology in various forms.
Mercurio,
okay, now, yep.
Do you have a slide for this?
Yeah, I do.
Help us follow. Thank you.
Sorry, sorry. Yeah, I was probably boring you with all my voice, with all that stuff. Okay, this is a list of psychological needs that I have adopted from Henry Murray. Now, I've dropped out, there's 16 here. He came up with about 20, but I dropped out 4. I'm not going to go into why, except that I believe these are very important, but also this list is open for modification and extension or improvement by research or clinical work. So anyway, the needs, would you prefer me to shut up and you just read the slide?
I'd like to hear from you.
Oh, okay. Should take a vote on it. Okay. Well, the need for acceptance is a fundamental desire for inclusion as opposed to isolation, rejection, bullying, or being shunned. Now, Henry Murray called it need rejection. But again, it's the result of rejection. Admiration has to be being the focus of positive emotion, delight, and interest by the carer, especially in infancy. Henry Murray called it infavoidance. Affiliation is relatedness to others to form friendships and associations. Now, all of these, as you can see, all of them were identified by Henry Murray, except that he had different labels for them than I've modernised the labels of the needs, but the concept are exactly the same. In other words, I'm not changing anything except giving them a new name as being requisites for well-being, as opposed to being reactions to adverse events. So there's the need for approval, the need for attention, autonomy, competence, power or control, esteem, nurturance, order, recognition, safety or security, stimulation, succurrence, and understanding. Now, I'm going to say this, that when past esteem, I have to say that self-determination theory has been an excellent introduction to focus on what they call the nutriments for well-being, which is fantastic. But they've decided that esteem is not a need, and I think they made a big mistake there. But anyway, and self-determination theory actually incorporates three basic categories of needs, whereas Henry Murray had a bigger list of needs. And all that I can say is the categories are okay, except that esteem is missing in self-determination theory. Anyway, what I've said here is that the one where I've changed the name, I've only changed some of the names. For example, need rejection I've called acceptance, info avoidance I've called admiration, and so on. Oh, actually, I should use the cursor maybe. There you go. Anyway, a few years ago, I actually couldn't tell the difference between approval and recognition, but now that I have since. Approval is the need to receive endorsement and support, to not be criticised, blamed, shamed, punished, or made to feel chastised or disapproved of, which Henry Murray called blame avoidance. And recognition is to receive praise, be viewed or held in a positive light, be extolled, seen an example worthy of praise and admiration. So they're kind of separate. But in my mind, in 1986, I combined the two, unfortunately. But anyway, any questions about those needs? Okay.
No, we've got one. Someone's raised their hand.
Yep.
Mike.
Yes, hi. I'm just wondering about, I mean, these make good sense, but just wondering how they would relate to attachment theory.
Yeah.
Is there an overlap? Is that something completely different? Perhaps just a comment about that. Thanks.
No, absolutely correct. See, the need for acceptance, admiration, affiliation, approval, attention, most of them, there's two basic categories. There's attachment needs, and then there's agency needs. Let's put it this way: agency needs relate to understanding, competence, power and control. So in other words, attachment is, a lot of needs relate to attachment, but not all. Does that make sense? The other thing is that what I discovered from my work with people in the community, including offenders, is that attachment needs have powerful influences, not just in toddlerhood or up to 3 years of age, because I actually have found trauma occurring in children from parental separation when they're 7 or 8 or 9 or 10, in the same way that an infant suffers. So what I'm saying is I would extend the range where attachment needs are important to a greater period of time than traditionally understood, or as I understand attachment theory. So, I mean, safety and security is obviously in regard to attachment, because that's when there are events that makes the child feel insecure, then obviously their safety or security needs is impaired. And in actual fact, I'm going to say that the need for safety and security, the need for order, the need for power and control are all impacted by maternal separation or parental separation. It doesn't have to be a mother, it can be another carer. And in fact, I kept finding those sorts of events associated with extreme behaviours in adulthood when usually men had failures in their marriages, or they were rejected or divorced or separated, and they had extreme reactions of distress and where they lost control and did terrible things either to others or themselves or both. So what I'm saying is broken attachments are a serious contributor to community problems involving violence, in my estimation. Okay. Now, I mentioned earlier about needs. Oh, sorry, I don't know if I answered the question properly or not, but I'll give it another shot later. What I've got on this slide is a distinction between how I describe needs and how Henry Murray described needs. But not to say that my explanation is any different. It's just that it's focusing on inputs. My description, for example, attention, Murray called it exhibition. I call it the need for attention, to be noticed and be paid attention. Whereas Murray's description, which was found in adults, was to attract attention to one's person, to excite, assume, stir, shock, thrill others, self-dramatisation. So, for example, that sort of description might apply to a histrionic personality, somebody who goes overboard, does that. Well, that means that basically their need for attention wasn't fulfilled when they were young. So you can actually understand a lot of personality disorders as being the byproduct of unmet psychological needs during development. Now, the need for esteem, sorry, can't make it move. The need for esteem, Murray called abasement, and my description is to be valued, generating feelings of worth. Now, Murray described abasement as involving to surrender, to comply and accept punishment, to apologise, confess, atone, self-depreciation, masochism, and so on. So similarly, autonomy, I describe it as the need for self-direction and freedom, where Murray saw the consequences of unmet need for autonomy to resist influence or coercion, to defy an authority or seek freedom in a new place, to strive for independence. So in other words, what I'm doing that I think is helpful for modern psychologists is to actually say that Henry Murray was really on the money, except that not all readers of him actually understood that he was also talking about ingredients for well-being. And in fact, self-determination theory writers have actually criticised him for having too many needs and not focusing on well-being. But in actual fact, in his writing, if you put it together properly, you'll see what I'm saying, which is that you can describe a need as an input, or an unmet need, you can see it as a byproduct or a manifestation. Is that understood or clear? Not sure. Okay. Now, the model I will be describing states that the core beliefs within schemas are the byproduct of the environmental frustration or gratification of specific psychological needs during development. The model specifies the processes whereby the gratification or frustration of particular needs results in the formation of core beliefs, and the model shows how the core beliefs shapes the formation of schemas, and that the content of a core belief is a pointer to or indicator of a specific psychological need impacted by favourable or unfavourable childhood events. Now, you may remember a few slides back where I had a quote from Judith Beck, of someone who thought of themselves as stupid or unable to understand. Well, that's clearly the result of an unmet need for competence during development, in my opinion. Now I'm going to run very quickly through some slides, this is basically how I put things together in what I call a hedonic psychological needs model. The hedonic bit has to do with the pleasure principle, because not only is it relevant to the creation of core beliefs, it's also relevant to the manifestations of symptoms and behaviours and psychological problems that we have by way of psychopathology. Okay. I don't have to talk. Would you like me to read it or not? Enzo, would you like me to read it or not?
I'd like to hear from you.
Okay. Okay, well, this is my model, which is still growing and flowing, but it started in 1986. Anyway, human beings have physical and psychological needs that affect their functioning and behaviour. Needs operate through the lifespan. Through the lifespan, the frustration of needs increases the experience of negative feelings and stress and increases motivational energy to bring about a more desirable feeling state. Now, there's a connection between psychological needs and feelings. Feelings serve as indices or flags of needs requiring fulfillment. They are also motivators or energizers of behaviour, and they can also be reinforcers of behaviour. Negative feelings register threats and unmet needs and act as motivators or energizers of behaviour. And positive feelings serve as reinforcers of behaviour and help consolidate some forms of learning, including the development of cognitions or beliefs. Therefore, psychological needs are both motivators, as indicated by Henry Murray, and basic inputs required for well-being, as indicated by Maslow and self-determination theory. This is my definition of a psychological need. Psychological need is a natural requirement that has to be provided to infants, children, and adolescents in order to promote their emotional growth and maintain well-being, and also the well-being of adults. Now, the gratification of needs during development provides the building blocks for well-being, and the frustration of needs promotes vulnerability to stress and psychopathology. And I'll be describing that process a little bit. Now, psychological needs that are frustrated by negative events in childhood are experienced as intense negative affect, which endures over time. And those examples I gave you of the prisoners or the clients I saw in prison is an indicator of that. Now, intensified pain experiences from negative childhood events impinging on needs are structuralised or recorded in memory, and these have ongoing motivational influences. Sorry, I skipped it. The effects of need frustration and trauma. Need frustration and trauma promote psychopathology, and need gratification during childhood development is a basic process in promoting growth and well-being. Negative need frustration and trauma can produce negative primal attributions or core beliefs that persist. And I'll now describe the processes associated with the creation of positive and negative core beliefs, respectively. When I first wrote my article in 1986, I only focused on the negative and not the positive. The process is slightly different, but I'm going to share both. So this is the hedonic model in more detail. Now, first thing I'm going to talk about are the processes involved in the creation of I'll summarise. Hang on. Yep. Okay. Okay. Hang on. Sorry. I'm going to find. Now, according to the hedonic model, I'm going to show you a chart, but I'll point to the chart in a minute. Well, basically what we have here is the list of psychological needs which we saw elsewhere, and the processes are that unmet needs that an infant or child or adolescent requires is expressed as a negative feeling, and which motivates emotional and behavioural responses by the individual to have the need met. Now, if the response is favourable, then what happens is that the feelings change from negative to positive. An experience of a positive feeling state, the need is gratified, and that becomes the building block of positive cognitive structures, beliefs about the self and the world, and which produces healthy functioning and well-being. And with the passage of time, another need pops up and comes and follows the same process. Now, I want to describe it a little bit in a bit more detail, but you can look at the chart on this left-hand side of the chart. Sorry, is it on your left-hand side? It's on my left-hand side. I hope it is. Okay. Now, the model proposes that when a need is gratified in a timely manner, the negative feelings associated with its manifestation dissipates and moves out of awareness, allowing a new need to enter awareness and motivate new responses. Over time, these ongoing experiences of need gratification involving the transformation of negative feelings into positive promote the formation of positive concepts about the self and the world, which form the basis of self-esteem, personal confidence, perceived efficacy and control, optimism, and of a stable and predictable view of the world and of the persons in one's midst. Here we are referring to the building blocks of internal working models as suggested by Bowlby and current attachment theorists. Now, for example, Marculinsa and et al. In 2003 in an article said that affect regulation is important in the caretaking of the young. That is, internal working models are formulated in response to distress resolution produced by the carer, which ideally involves helping soothe the child's negative affect by appropriate and sensitive care. Internal working models are considered to be similar notions to the personal constructs of G.A. Kelly, which are information structures that serve to guide behaviour and adaptation by the anticipation of future events. It is proposed that the formation of positive constructs about oneself and the world that enables the prediction of future events and thereby being able to control events and have adaptive responses. These are facilitated by an unencumbered process of the negative affect associated with specific psychological needs being transformed into positive affect by appropriate inputs from the social world, which can include carers, adults, siblings, and peers. Significantly, and this is my contribution to psychology, the hedonic model suggests that positive self-concepts, a type of self-schemata, are indicators and byproducts of particular gratified psychological needs. For example, I am worthy, being esteem need, being gratified. I am capable, competence need. I can make things happen, power and control need. I am safe, safety and security need. In the hedonic model then, positive self-concepts are typically considered to be attributions or cognitive conclusions arising from the gratification of specific psychological needs during development. Okay? Any questions on that's a positive or any questions at this stage? I'm going to say, because I skipped a bit, which is that the formation of positive concepts about the self and the world isn't an instantaneous event. It's accrued slowly over time. That's a big difference between the formation of between the effects of need frustration and need gratification, because the effects of need frustration are more instantaneous if the distress or trauma is significant. In other words, it can be a cumulative process, but in the main, it's an instantaneous reaction to an adverse upset. Okay, now let me refer to the right-hand part of the flow chart here. So, if a need is experienced as a negative feeling state and it motivates a response by the individual to have the need met, is there a favourable response from the environment? If the answer is no, there's an increase in frustration, which is the need frustration extreme, intense or traumatic? If the answer is no, then what happens is there's a repetition of the process, and maybe there is a favourable response, and then maybe the individual experiences positive feelings and good stuff. But on the other hand, can't make the cursor move. Is the need frustration extreme, intense, or traumatic? If the answer is yes, then I postulate, based on my experience with those clients in prison, that the individual in childhood experiences an augmented negative feeling state, and if it's intense enough, it produces what I call a cataclysmic adaptation, which has multiple consequences. One part is that a negative affective cognitive structure is created in memory. That means it's a negative feeling and an attribution of its cause. Another thing that happens is that the individual has at their disposal, and I suspect it's genetically determined, they have cognitive defenses that attenuate negative affect, and individuals vary in the defenses that they have at their disposal. So, and another aspect is that there are behavioural responses that attenuate affect. So the need is either avoided or pursued excessively. Now, going back to the affective. Yes, oh, sorry. Yep.
We are just off halfway the time.
Yep.
Would you like us to pause here? I don't know your structure.
Okay, can I finish a little bit on this?
So you'll let us know at an appropriate moment to take a break.
Well, I'm happy to stop after I finish this slide.
Okay.
If that's okay. But the thing is, I'd like to complete the scenario, if I can, which is that what I've hypothesized is that affective cognitive structures are recorded when there's an intense event, and it's got two components. One is a record of the feeling, and the other is an attribution about its cause. Okay, so that's this section here. And then there are cognitive defenses and there are behavioural responses. Now, all of these contribute to maladaptive functioning and absence of well-being because they encapsulate a record of an event in the past that projects into the future when the environment may well be different. But it remains static and inflexible. Now, I'm going to say also this before finishing this section, is that I'm trying to locate the cursor. The components A, B, and C actually are the elements within schema therapy, early maladaptive schemas. In other words, early maladaptive schemas comprise these ingredients. That's my suggestion. Okay, are there any questions? And otherwise, we can pause at this point.
There is a question in the chat. Kath Valentine, would you like to raise it in voice? Or I could read it. The question is, so do you mean that despite there being an accumulation of situations, she has responded to say that she can't unmute, so I'll continue. Despite there being an accumulation of situations where needs are met in childhood, that this can be overridden or derailed, so to speak, by an extreme, intense, traumatic off event, which can lay down negative core beliefs.
I think so. I haven't. Of course, yes. Yeah, that's what trauma is. That's what trauma is.
Would anybody else like to ask a question?
Well, actually, maybe can I go back, because I didn't probably explain the cataclysmic adaptation process as much as I could have, or as much as I can. So basically, the model proposes that ongoing frustration, in other words, if it's cumulative or recurring, or if it's traumatic, in other words, extremely intense, increases the degree of felt distress, the negative affect, to a point where a threshold of high distress is reached in the child, whereupon a cataclysmic adaptive process occurs. That adaptive process involves at least two elements: the recording in memory of the upset feeling which I refer to as an augmented negative feeling state. And secondly, the generation of an attribution or causal hypothesis of why the distress was experienced. In other words, what was that? What was that? You know, I'm bad. Nobody loves me. Whatever the conclusion is at the time. Anyway, the perceived cause between the affect and the events. This conclusion, like the affect that triggered its occurrence, is also retained in memory. Other elements may exist in such mental records or schemas, such as somatic experiences and the activation of cognitive defences such as suppression, repression, etc., that reduce negative affect. Emphasis is here placed on the affective and cognitive elements, although an appreciation of the role of defences developed in psychoanalytic therapy is desirable, as are the neurophysiological substrata through which important biological and psychological events are processed and encoded. Now, the latter includes changes in brain chemistry and structure that can accompany negative and positive childhood experiences, which people have written about. So what I'm actually saying is that when an event is recurringly frustrating or intensely traumatic, there are records laid down in memory involving the feeling and an attribution about its cause. And that's why I refer to affective attributions involved in both need gratification and need frustration. But my awareness of them came from the experience of intense affect where need frustration has occurred, and it's recorded in memory, and then it can be triggered or re-aroused later on in life. I don't think I've done a good job of explaining the flowchart. I'm sorry about that. But I'm going to say that depending on the frustrated need, the self-concepts are generated, like I'm not good enough, low self-esteem if somebody doesn't get acceptance or approval. Now, a concept of I'm stupid is quite clearly the result of an unmet need for competence. I'm unworthy is to do with an unmet for esteem. Unsafe got to do with safety or security. So basically, if you look at core beliefs, you can categorize them quite easily into need categories, in my opinion. And in fact, I think I developed a bit of a skill in picking up from people's verbalizations their beliefs, which links very closely to an unmet need. But there's more to say about how unmet needs manifest in people, and that's really exciting because it gives clinicians a handle on how to identify what's going on. And maybe we'll do a bit of that after a break, unless there's other questions.
There is one. Could you comment on the somatic experience disease linked to negative core beliefs?
No, I don't know enough about it.
Shall we return in about 8 minutes? Let's say it's 20 past, and time to gather thoughts, gather tea, and come back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello, Mercurio.
Hello.
Hello. It's such I'm really enjoying the amount of information you're giving, Mercurio. I was thinking, and I think you're very right in saying that perhaps you've not done justice to your flow chart, because I think so much to tell in isn't it?
Yep.
Yes. And I was wondering, yes, is that particular, that particular flow chart, is it really representing nearly everything else, or that you've spoken before, and is it representing the whole process of
well, not really, because, for example, where you've got the list of psychological needs, right, unless you understand that psychological needs were identified a long time ago as being relevant to human functioning and the development of personality, it's like basically the flow chart doesn't say anything about that. It just has a list of needs. So all that I'm saying, no, it's not. But no, that flow chart just describes two events. One is what happens when needs are gratified and what happens when needs are frustrated. That's all it does. It doesn't really put it in context, in my opinion. It doesn't tell the whole story. The whole story has got to do with the fact that human beings have a long period of dependency upon adult care. They're vulnerable. And things that happen during that time. In other words, there are other principles that have to be added to the flow chart to make it meaningful.
It's Mercurio, the reason when I saw the description of your what you've been working for most of, your entire clinical, it's so similar. For 10 years, I've been actually writing a book on anxiety, and I'm a psychologist too, who's, been practicing for 30, 40 years now. And everything that you are talking is in terms of how the self develops, and essentially how would psychopathology develop, or good functioning. It's either this or that develop. So that I'm finding that nearly everything that you're saying is things that, because my whole work is in the area of self, my research, my PhD, everything in the past was in the area of the self's development. How do the self-concept develop, and Epstein's theory, let's say, of self-concept, or so it's very exciting that you've been working so long on, and you've written so much on this area. I hadn't heard about that.
I'm not an academic. I'm a clinician.
I know, but you from the clinician, is you're studying the cases, and
Yeah. It's pretty hard getting articles accepted in the academic journals.
Yeah. I'm one of the few who have been from the academia, and I don't have a single publication, not even anything from my PhD, not a single.
Okay.
But I'm working more as a clinical, rather than I taught for a little while. But I think, Mercurio, yes, there's so much to tell that perhaps how you're feeling, that it's not coming through really. You're not doing justice.
Oh, well, yeah, it started off on the wrong foot, but no, I'm happy where we're at. But I'm going to say, if you're interested in describing anxiety, well, my simple rule of thumb is that that's the result of unmet safety security needs.
Absolutely. I was just wondering. I mean, I've had this book draft for now, as I said, nearly 10 years now, and I was wondering, would you be, if I could send it to you to to have a read and tell me what you think?
I'd be happy to give it a go, but maybe my understanding in your particular area may not be as deep as yours. So, I mean, I can give it a go. I'd be happy to give it a go.
Yes.
Sorry, I've got a visitor.
Oh my, how old?
15 and a half.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Hello. I can't see its face. Maybe just the camera a little down.
I'll stand up with you. Oh, sorry, I've got earphones on as well.
Oh, hello. Hello. And what's her or his name?
Her name's Meek.
Oh,
M-I-Q-U-E. Meek.
What would that mean?
Sorry?
Has it got a meaning? That's a very unique.
It was inherited. The name was inherited. When she was about a year old, I acquired her, so the name was already given.
Oh, I wonder if there's a meaning to it.
Don't know. Hey.
Mercurio, do you need a little pause? So don't worry. I just wanted to
Actually,
have a little rest.
I've got a cold cup of tea here.
Oh.
Hello. I think we're about to really begin. Hi.
Hello, Enzo.
How are you?
Good. I'm
Nice to meet you.
Niru. I don't know. I've often send you some emails. I think from when you first started TherapyRoute, I've been, there on your, so well done.
Thank you very much for the support. Good.
Yes, and getting and organizing wonderful sharings like we are having tonight. It's really
I'm glad. There are a couple of others as well. Also will be.
You're doing a really good job in terms of your TherapyRoute. It's grown over the years, and such positive feedback from a lot of clients and other people.
Glad to hear.
Well done.
Mercurio.
Yep.
Okay. Now, I think we should get going. Tell me how much time you would like to leave for discussion. Where are you?
Well, I'm quite happy to be guided by you.
How far are you with your planned presentation?
Sorry?
How far are you with the planned presentation? If we, in half an hour, would that give you enough time to go through all of your work?
Yep, half an hour, yep.
Okay, so I will do that then. At around... no, we can't do that.
Hang on. Better put you down. Hang on. Better put you down.
Yeah, but that would only give us 10 minutes. So how about at 20 to 3, I will flag it.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Have we lost a few people, have we?
Very few.
Okay. Anyway, sorry, what? How many?
72.
Oh, I can only see 4. Sorry, that's okay.
If anybody else could turn their camera on, please do. It really makes a huge difference for the presenter. It helps the presenter feel like they're delivering a presentation, not alone in a room. Great. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Well, I mentioned the role of defenses. I think that's really, really important. If you want to understand psychopathology, I'm not an expert on defense mechanism, but there's a book by a gentleman, and obviously defense mechanisms have originated from psychoanalytic theory. But I'm not an expert in the field, except that I know that different individuals use different coping mechanisms, both behaviourally and cognitively and affectively, to deal with with stress or distress. Anyway, I'm going to go back to something I didn't say. Basically, I'm going to say that in my work in the justice system and elsewhere in the community, I've basically come to the conclusion that the things that people carry forward into the society, into the community, and we designate as being evil or bad are the result of unmet psychological needs during development. And I think I've been trying to share that knowledge in the community in various ways. I'm having more luck in the community than I have in the media. The media is very resistant to promoting any understanding of why they like headlines that are shocking and catch attention. They're not really interested in understanding why people do the things they do. Anyway, one of the things that I noticed in my work is that the realisation that unmet psychological needs are often discernible or detectable in the stream of consciousness of clients via their verbalizations. And crucially, that the cognitive explanation arrived at in childhood becomes the person's attributional or explanatory style. We know about pessimistic and optimistic explanatory style. Well, I'm saying that they derive from affective attributions or core beliefs that originate from need frustration and need gratification. Indeed, I found that adults repeatedly use affective attributions originally created in childhood to make sense of the why of the trauma and need frustration, to account for current difficulties, past ones, and to predict future events. And these processes are discernible in people's cognitive products, such as verbalizations during therapy, in written documents, or daily conversations. Now, in the mid-1970s, I completed my master's thesis, and it was on depression. I was basically examining Beck's cognitive model of the cognitive triad in depression. So what I've got here is a transcript. Sorry, somewhere. Whoops, sorry. Oh, go back. Here we go. This is the depression study. What I did is I had three groups of people. Two were depressed and one was not depressed, matched groups. And I put them in a cubicle and I gave them a thinking out loud exercise to do, which was just to say whatever came into their head for 5 minutes, which was recorded, transcribed, and then the themes were analysed by some raters, independent raters. But basically, 10 years after I did that research, and basically it confirmed the existence of Beck's cognitive triad in depression. Anyway, but 10 years later, I reviewed some of the transcripts, and this is one of them. And this particular lady, she was a psychiatric inpatient, and she said to me, "I'm really pleased to be able to help you, and I hope you can help somebody else through, my effort." And in actual fact, this is her contribution. This is a transcript. Now, there's a transcript, and in red are my comments, if you like, how I understand what that means. This lady said, "Well, there's always one thought in my head, and that's disgust at how things have turned out in my life," which is an affective, due to my stupidity, which is an explanation or attribution. And now that I don't have the children with me, they're in my thoughts all the time. And I know that I can never help bring them up, which is a prediction, because I see them just not too frequently. And these thoughts are always in my mind. Also, another thought that's always there is how things are never going to be much better, prediction, because I can't solve the mistakes I've made. I can't resolve them, I suppose I should say. It's another explanation. I also keep thinking how wonderful it would feel to feel good again, to enjoy life as it should be enjoyed. I pretty often think about how glad I'll be when it's time to go to bed and I can go to sleep and not have to react to people. Anyway, that's all. That's about all I can say that I have it in my head at the moment. And always I feel inferior to other people. Negative affective reaction, indicative of negative self-evaluation. That's something that's with me most when I'm with people, of any kind of people. My explanation is, The hedonic model postulates that clinically significant verbalizations in the stream of consciousness of adults are products, generalizations, explanations, causal attributions, and predictions deriving from the individual's basic negative affective attributions laid down during childhood development as a result of psychological need frustration. So specifically, the model points to this depressed person having suffered from a frustration of her need for competence during her formative years, hence to an inferred core belief, I'm stupid. I know I can never, due to my stupidity. So she's got a core belief that she's stupid. That core belief is used as an explanatory construct to understand current and previous adverse events and predict future ones, as is evident in the transcript. The model suggests that she also suffered a frustration of her need for esteem, which Henry Murray called need abasement, in that her self-conception of herself as inferior to others and engages in extreme self-disapproval. I feel inferior to others. So basically, I was able to, in retrospect, examine this thinking out loud product and see that the operation of affective attributions, which is explanations, she was explaining her future and her current circumstances by way of beliefs that she was stupid and she was inferior. She wasn't as good as other people. So, and I'm going to say that process can be applied during the course of psychotherapy with a client just by latching on to their attributions or explanations, whether they're about the past, the present, or the future. In fact, one of the things I sometimes ask people to do is to say, okay, complete this sentence. In the past, things went wrong for me because, and they complete the sentence, or in the future, things might go bad for me because, and they complete the sentence. And what you'll find is their automatic attributions that they acquired in childhood will come out as the producer of the response. And so it's very easy in tuning into clients in psychotherapy to actually identify what their unmet needs are through their verbalizations. Now, in fact, I've skipped some sections in this because this I think is in one of the papers that is on TherapyRoute upload. Basically, I believe it is possible for a clinician with a bit of steadiness in their approach, because you can't assume that somebody says something, it's automatically an unmet need. So what I'm saying is these are examples that highlight an unmet need or a need in individuals. So, for example, a sample cognition might be nobody has the right to tell anyone else what to do. That's clearly an autonomy need expression. Nobody cares, a sufferance. I want everyone to like me is acceptance. I never get a pat on the back, no matter how well I did. My father would always say, you can do better. That's got to do with recognition. I'm a klutz. I can never get anything right. That's competence. I absolutely hate being ignored. That's attention. I want to be recognised for my special talents, not just be someone lost in the crowd. That's admiration. It's either my way or the highway. That's control or power. I always feel inferior. I'm not good enough. That's esteem. Now, I've got other examples, but you get the idea. In other words, people's verbalizations can be classified as relating to a psychological need. Now, I don't want to take credit for that knowledge because Henry Murray said that. Henry Murray used the word verbones to describe cognitions or verbalizations, which never caught on. But anyway, Henry Murray was a genius, and I'm glad to be able to bring his work back to life. Now, this is going back. We're going to go back to Murray's press events. He categorises family in support, involving cultural discord, family discord, capricious discipline, parental separation, absence of a parent, father or mother, parental illness, father or mother, death of a parent, father or mother, inferior parent, father or mother, dissimilar parent, father or mother, poverty, unsettled home, danger and misfortune. And here, when we're talking about anxiety, this is very relevant, because anxiety is nothing more than the manifestation of unmet need for security and safety that is projected into the future. So there's lack or loss, there's rejection, unconcern, birth of sibling, aggression, dominance, experiencing dominance, nurturance and indulgence, succurrence, deference, affiliation, sex, exposure, seduction, homosexual, heterosexual, talking about abuse, parental intercourse, deception or betrayal, inferiority. And basically he identified that when children are born and they've got some inferiority, whether it's physical or intellectual, it can have ramifications on their development of their personality. So most of these factors have been actually, studied in developmental psychopathology. In other words, Henry Murray had foresight, but it was basically by the study of a team that examined these 51 adults, 51 men, that came up that there were developmental events in childhood that caused long-term consequences. Anyway, I'll skip this. This is just a bit of an overview that I've created. It's not a piece of academic research with data that's quantifiable. It's just my clinical impressions over time, which links up adverse childhood events, what need is thwarted, what the negative feeling is that's produced, what the core belief or attribution is that's generated by the feeling, what are the behavioural manifestations or compensatory strategies, and what are some extreme indicators that transform the negative feelings or beliefs. So I'll just get one example here. Let's say emotional neglect, institutional upbringing, for example, that affects succurrence. The resultant feeling is one of deprivation, loneliness, rejection. I've got loneliness twice. Core beliefs: I'm unlovable, I'm alone, I'm not good enough, unworthy, nobody cares. Excessive behavioural manifestation: excessive dependence or avoidance of dependence. That means it's schizoid, or esteem problems. And what I've noticed, for example, that particular environmental event is a contributor to sex offences against children of men who are childhood victims themselves. And I also observed it in midlife shoplifting in women, and say alcohol abuse. Anyway, what I'm saying is this chart actually, the most important bit is not necessarily the extreme indicators, but the fact that adverse events that impact on needs produce certain feelings and then certain self-concepts or beliefs about the world, and it has coping mechanisms or consequences, behavioural manifestations. Now, I believe that this doesn't have data other than my impression. So, in other words, it's not verified, but I'm pretty close. I think it's pretty close to the truth. But, for example, maternal separation or sudden loss. It affects succurence, security and safety and control. It produces feelings of helplessness, vulnerability, powerlessness, loss, jealousy, anxiety, mistrust. Core beliefs like I'm vulnerable, I'm helpless, I can't survive alone, I'm unsafe. I don't need others. That's when you become whatever the word is. Anyway, basically, the behavioural manifestations is distress by change or loss, high need for structure, excessive need for control, hypersensitivity to abandonment, and that can lead to chronic anxiety, depression, homicide triggered by abandonment or jealousy, or a schizoid adaptation. So in other words, the flow-ons are there, but I think I'll just go to another chart, if I can locate it. So what I did is I gave some examples for every need, but this little chart here, again, it's not empirically validated, but basically I link up personality disorders with various cognitive content or schemas, and this is what has been suggested as being their threats or vulnerabilities by researchers in the area of personality disorders. And what I've added are what the needs are that are thwarted in childhood. And in actual fact, the threats and vulnerabilities that people with personality disorders experience in adulthood are exactly the same as the trigger, the original causes, if that makes sense. So, for example, dependent personality, others are a source of abandonment, and the self is helpless. So there's a concern with rejection or abandonment. The unmet need has got to do with acceptance or approval. Obsessive compulsive, the concern are with flaws, mistakes, disorganisation or imperfections. That's got to do with the need for order or competence. So all that I'm saying is that no matter where you look, whether it's depression, whether it's anxiety, whether it's personality disorders, or whether it's in the behaviour of your family members or yourself, there are always unmet needs that play a part if there's distress. Now, I'm going to say that great references regarding the operation of schemas, motives, and other aspects of personality disorders are in a variety of chapters in the book Handbook of Personology and Psychopathology, edited by Stephen Strack. And here are some of the chapters. Now, I'm not an expert on personality disorders by any means, but I think I understand the developmental process that creates a lot of psychopathology.
Mercurio, we are at 22.
Okay. Now, this is for theoreticians. This is the table. If somebody wants to measure at various levels of functioning, there I've got a structure for how you can go about doing research. Okay, having said that, I'll quit now and ask for comments or questions.
It's been really rich. Thank you. People, let's take a moment.
I'm trying to find a blank slide.
People, please just raise your hands or make a comment in the chat if you need to, and I'll read that for you. We have 20 minutes. And Joanna, did you want to say something? Oh. I see there's a thank you in the chat.
Oh.
And Niru asks if she would like you to talk through your last slide.
Which one?
And Jennifer Kane has a question for you.
Okay.
So let's hear the question, Jennifer, and then go to the last slide.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, so I can't turn on my camera. I apologize. I put a question in the chat, but it appears that maybe it's not showing on your end.
I'm not au fait with extracting them.
Oh,
so can you verbalize it?
Do you want to ask it, Jennifer?
Yes, although I am a little perplexed that it's not showing up. But anyways.
No, I do see it. I just missed it. I'm sorry.
So what I said was, where are the other personality disorders? Because you only showed some of them. And I was wondering if you had a second of the personality disorders, because I appreciated your formulation, and I was hoping to see those as well, if possible.
Well, what I'm going to suggest is that you could probably do your own research, on these chapters. What I'm saying is chapter 27. No, sorry, not chapter. Chapter 27 actually talks about motives, right? And it's only a small step to move on to needs from motives. So what I'm saying is you can probably find some useful information there, but I haven't gone through every personality disorder. That was just an example. I haven't gone through all of them, but if you go to chapter 27, then you will find a description of motives, and from them you can go back and identify psychological needs. I haven't done the research. I haven't put it all together, to be quite honest. So, and as I said, I'm not an expert on personality disorders, but there is no doubt in my mind that all our manifestations, where there's the stress and there's inappropriate coping mechanisms, has got to do with unmet psychological needs. That might be an overgeneralization, but I don't think so. Any other questions? Sorry, did you say you weren't able to see the image?
Niru had asked if you could go through the last slide again.
The last slide.
I see mostly in the chat at the moment is thank yous. Please give us a question. I know you have, or comment. Angelo has a question.
Oh, thanks. Mercurio, this is very interesting. I must admit I usually hate attending these things because I find they're usually quite redundant. But this was fascinating. So thank you. I appreciate your decades of experience. Those last few charts really hit it. And okay, this is where
Sorry.
I wonder if you have.
Sorry, can you turn your volume down? It's a bit too distorted. No.
That's probably because I'm shouting. I'll try to keep my voice down.
Go ahead.
Is it better if I speak lower?
It's breaking.
Okay.
Breaking.
So what I'm saying is,
You've been muted, Angelo. Okay, you're away.
Sorry, Enzo, maybe you can repeat. I couldn't understand it. Sorry.
I think Angelo was still getting to his question. For the moment, he was saying, oh, wait, he's typed. He said, I have a hard stop on the hour, but I wonder if you could give a bit of advice to parents and elaborate on SDT.
Elaborate on what?
SDT would to, I think the abbreviation.
Self-determination theory. Self-determination theory.
That's correct. Yes.
Well, self-determination theory has actually brought into the 20th century, 21st century, the psychological needs and parenting practices are highly relevant in bringing up healthy children and to reduce emotional disturbance. But unfortunately, they've collapsed needs into competence, relatedness, and what was the other one? Three categories, and they've lost self-esteem, and they've lost all the other needs that Henry Murray articulated. And I think that's sad. So self-determination theory has produced a lot of research which shows that stress in children and in adults is related to unmet needs, but they only relate to the three categories. I'm trying to think what the third category is. Competence, relatedness, and don't remember. Sorry. but it's a good innovation, but it misses out on the breadth that Henry Murray's theory has, in my opinion.
Linda has asked if you would say obsessive compulsiveness is related to or if the unmet need of obsessive compulsiveness is too much order as well as not enough order.
No, it means it's a preoccupation with order. It's a preoccupation, means it's an adaptation to try to reduce chaos and insecurity, uncertainty. So in other words, obsessive, it's an overemphasis on order and structure in order to maintain a reduction in anxiety. But there can be a difficulty with one's sense of competence that contributes to that. So that's why I think, so obsessive compulsive behaviour has got to do with an excessive preoccupation with order, so basically what produces an excessive preoccupation is an absence of it during development, or an absence of reassurance that you're capable. So in other words, there's uncertainty. So I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and I can see that with a lot of clients, but there's a couple of clients that I'm struggling to find that unmet need in, but I just need to keep going, I think.
Well, one way of getting to it is you encourage them to engage in response prevention, which means that instead of them doing what they want to do to organise things and make themselves safe and secure, is they withhold that response, and that will generate the anxiety associated with the unmet need.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm doing that. I'm just still kind of trying to get to the unmet need in the childhood bit, but it's okay. Your response is perfect. Thank you so much.
Well, you don't have to. What you have to focus on is the current feeling that generates the coping mechanisms, and you encourage them to tolerate the feeling, learn to manage it in a way that instead of avoiding it, it's emotional processing. I basically withhold the safety response or the avoidance response, and there will be an experience of distress. And it's a matter of what I say to clients is that when you were a child, you couldn't handle that distress, but you're an adult now, and it's all it is a feeling. And if you allow yourself to feel the feeling fully, it'll come and it'll go. And the next time you feel it, you'll be familiar with it and you'll be able to manage it again. And it's a very, very slow process of habituation that you encourage the client to undergo.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Nada,
more questions
for you?
Hello to all. First of all, thank you for the lecture. It was wonderful. But I was just thinking how this is a very complex subject. And actually, you were talking about frustration of needs mostly in a negative context. And I was thinking how actually frustration of needs is necessary in a child's development. To go through the developmental phases, actually, child's needs need to be frustrated to allow the child to progress to another developmental phase. And also, for example, how satisfaction of one kind of need can maybe prevent satisfaction of another kind of need. For example, when you talk about need for safety and dependence, and then on the other hand, need for independence. And need for feeling capable or self-confidence, etc. So I think it's very, very complex, really, and maybe it's more about the level of frustration, probably, which is very difficult to quantify. Of course, what is enough? When do we try to meet the needs too much sometimes even, and be too protective of a child, and maybe of a client as well.
Well, it is possible. It is possible to be overprotective. For example, if you say that if a parent is overly concerned with safety and security, and they inhibit the child's exploration, then obviously that's not helpful. But I think most theories of child development would say that the emotional regulation is actually created by positive care that reduces the stress. I think that's my understanding of it, and that's what I would promote. So if a child is distressed, I wouldn't say, oh, let them suffer because it'll make them stronger. No, if a child is in distress, the thing to do is to satisfy or to, assist them to regulate the feeling by providing reassurance or whatever it is that they need. So I don't quite agree that you have to frustrate in order to make somebody progress. I don't really see that as being relevant. But
I didn't even mean to, frustrate them on purpose, but to let them maybe face certain life situations when they'll be able to use their capabilities to overcome them. I think this is a very important part in learning, or
Yeah, overprotection isn't helpful. I agree. Overprotection isn't helpful, but neglect is worse.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Okay, there are a couple of questions in the chat. I'll read them all, and then I'll ask Mandy to talk if you can decide how you want to handle them. There they are. So would you say obsessive compulsiveness is unmet need? Oh, no, we've read that one. I'm interested in hearing more on the therapeutic process following the formulations.
Okay, can I give you a case?
Go on.
Can I give you a case? This is Nancy, we'll call her. She was a client in her 50s. She presented for therapy with an image of herself as a victim. She was suffering from depression, anxiety, and stress, and was overwhelmed by feelings of helplessness. The helplessness was associated with her wanting to shelter her adult son from certain life difficulties arising from the breakdown of his marriage, but she felt unable to do so successfully. She also had long-standing beliefs that she was not important, that no one cared for her, that she had no right to speak up for herself, and that she was often blamed unfairly. Whilst feeling impotent and weak internally, Nancy said she felt good helping others because it made her feel less helpless. Anyway, she became overwhelmed by a sense of failure about not being able to help her son who was having problems. So GP sent her to me, and using the hedonic model's prediction that Nancy currently felt helpless, she was likely to have had a long-standing yet unconscious core belief pertaining to helplessness. I asked her to try to recall the earliest occasion she might have felt helpless or thought, I'm helpless. She said, oh, that's easy. When she was 6, she mentioned an event that she had not previously discussed with anyone. She reported that she had been sexually abused several times by the male member of an elderly couple who babysat her. Nancy had told a child friend about the abuse, who told her own mother, who'd informed Nancy's mother. Now, Nancy's mother approached her at age 6 and firmly stated that she would not let her be babysit again by that couple. The mother then reportedly asked 6-year-old Nancy why she had not told her directly of the abuse. Nancy, who already felt that her mother favoured an older sister, took her mother's comments as blaming her for the abuse events. Nancy stated during counselling that the reality was that she had been too frightened to speak up to her mother in anticipation of her mother being angry with her. And in anticipation of her mother getting angry, she did not offer her mother an explanation, but internalised a sense of being unfairly blamed and disapproved of. So unconsciously from that point on, she felt that she was a victim who was wrongly blamed, treated poorly, not cared about by others, and did not speak up for her rights. Now, immediately after Nancy described that event, in the first counselling session, I treated her using a redecision process, which I borrowed from Goulding in 1979. They wrote a book. Now, I asked her to close her eyes, mentally go back to the time of the events and report as if they were occurring now in the present tense. After going over those events with corrective input to make the recounting in the here and now and not a historical event, she was then encouraged to repeat the exercise, but change the script of those events. She was now to speak out to her mother about what was in her mind as a 6-year-old child and to say what had been left unsaid. Nancy verbalised to her imagined mother in the present tense that she was scared of making her angry and that what had happened was not her fault. Nancy was then encouraged to come to the present moment in adulthood and reaffirm her new assertiveness and decision to speak her mind as an adult in the future. She benefited so much from the intervention that a 15-year depression that had resisted medical treatment cleared up after that session, and she called me a miracle worker. Such therapeutic work can address the affect and cognition arising from traumatic events, not just by cognitive disputation, but by an active process involving a redecision which actively counters original responses and hopefully facilitates the shedding of an emotionally based core belief and script through which the client had negotiated the future. But what enabled me to identify the problem is the feeling of helplessness which she came into the session with and explored the origins of it. So what I'm saying is, if I'm to sort of complement cognitive behaviour therapy approaches, it's by actually looking at the feeling that is attached to the core belief, because that's where the healing has to take place.
Thank you, Mercurio. We're at time, but there is one more question from Mandy. Would you like to take it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Mandy.
I'll try and make it quick. Sorry, I was on my cell phone and I couldn't get onto the video. I just wanted to find out from you, thanks very much. There's a case that I've recently seen where it's the parents that have come to me regarding their son's, what I would term very destructive behavior, almost, sort of death-defying, high-risk behavior. And I know he grew up with a sister just from the session where he always felt less than and not good enough. And so while you've been talking, I've been thinking, what is the underlying need? And then I connected it perhaps to the self-abasement that you were talking to earlier, but I'm not entirely sure. So that's the first question. And the second one is, where is the intervention? Is it with the parents who are terrified he's going to die, or is it with the young 21-year-old?
Okay. Well, actually, I'm going to say that if he has poor self-esteem, right, then I think it's a byproduct of, from what you said, from an unmet need for attention or admiration or care, all of those things. What I'm saying is, if a child feels that they're in the shadow of somebody else, it means they feel that they've missed out on something. And what it is that they've missed out on, is it attention? Is it approval? So, in other words, self-esteem poor self-esteem is a consequence of inputs that haven't, or the lack of inputs, or either inputs, negative inputs, or the lack of positive inputs. So it's a matter of, but it's too late to treat the parents, not to have the parents solve the problem. I think an adult has a responsibility to become aware of their inner processes and work with them. But if the child was 10 or 12 or 6, I would work with the parents, because that can change the environment. But it's too late to change the environment for this fellow. I think if he has no motivation and no insight, then I don't know what I can suggest. But it's unlikely. But I suppose the parents can open up a conversation with him about what it is that he feels he's missed out on, or in what way he's been unfairly treated or whatever. And by being able to articulate those things, he can then maybe transfer to a therapist and express the same feelings.
Thank you.
Again,
yes, thanks.
Again, okay.
We have to stop, everyone. Really, Mercurio, thank you very much for the wealth of information and your generosity in being prepared to share, and I'm sure all of the time it took you to prepare for today's presentation. To everybody, thanks for joining, and I hope we see you again.
My pleasure.
You wanted to say,
you
want to follow up there? I cut you off?
No. The only thing is, I'm hoping this can be edited.
Of course. I'll do my best.
I'm embarrassed about some of the events at the beginning. Sorry. Yeah.
Those unmet needs.
Anyway. Yeah. Well, thank you very, very much for the opportunity. I've appreciated it, and I probably only delivered 3/4 of what I prepared. It doesn't matter. I'm delighted to have had the opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Till next time.
Thanks. Bye.